Welcome to the Spongebob Characters Iceberg. If you don't know the format, it's basically a deep dive into a topic with the most known content being up top, and as the video goes on, it becomes less known and more obscure. I also put timestamps in the video, so if you want to skip ahead and just see the more lesser known characters, feel free. And I'm trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I could definitely use some help, but other than that, I really hope y'all enjoy the video. Okay, understandable that this is the very first character on the iceberg because he's like the name of the show, but SpongeBob is this childish, clumsy, and joyful little square guy. Of course, like the intro song says, he lives in a pineapple at the bottom of the sea with his pet Gary and his neighbors Squidward and Patrick. He's the fry cook at the Krusty Krab and attends Miss Pub's boating school. Since I'm sure everyone knows the base level stuff about SpongeBob, here's what the concept art looked like. Here's the exact species of sea sponge that he was, which is revealed in the SpongeBob musical. And here's his voice actor, Tom Kenny. The creator of the show, Steven Hillenburg, RIP to the GOAT, chose SpongeBob's design and pretty much the whole setting of the show based on his past career of being a marine biologist. SpongeBob was also based on Bob the Sponge, a character in an educational book about sea creatures that Hillenburg wrote. Patrick is SpongeBob's best friend, whose main character trait is just being kinda dumb and naive. He lives under a rock and doesn't really have a job, but he's worked at Goofy Goober's The Krusty Krab, The Chum Bucket, and also being the host of The Patrick Show. The Patrick Show is a spin-off of SpongeBob where he pretty much just hosts a late-night talk show, in which other SpongeBob characters and Patrick's family will appear on every now and then. I don't want to get into too much detail right now because there are other Patricks, like versions of him, that'll show up later on the iceberg, so just wait for that. Gary is SpongeBob's pet snail that's made to pretty much just act like a cat. He at first wasn't planned to be a major character and was supposed to just be a background character in SpongeBob's house, but after the first season, the creators decided to give him more of a focal role in the show. In Camp Coral, a spin-off prequel series of SpongeBob, we learned that Gary first met SpongeBob at the camp and later went on to adopt him at the local shelter. In the episode Treats, we also see a picture of the moment SpongeBob picked Gary out. Gary has also had plenty of episodes focused around just him, like Dumped, Gary Takes a Bath, and The Great Snow Race, or even, Have You Seen This Snail? A classic. Squidward is pretty much just the opposite of SpongeBob, being really cynical, selfish, and grumpy for the most part. He works a depressing dead-end job of cashier at the Krusty Krab and has a lot of artistic dreams like playing the clarinet, being a composer, or his art. If you're a returning viewer, it's likely that you already watched my whole Squidward iceberg, but if not, definitely go check that out after this. Sandy's a foreigner to Bikini Bottom because she used to just be like a land squirrel, but she came from Texas and lives in an air-filled tree dome at the bottom of the sea. She's like a mad scientist cowgirl character who also enjoys karate. We originally learned the most about her in the early episode Texas, where she gets homesick and sings about her home of Texas. She was sent down to Bikini Bottom to study the sea creatures and their lifestyles, and because I couldn't help but bring this up, there's a lot of theories that say the show is actually just a reality show in the real world that's about mutated sea creatures, and Sandy's working with the film crew to keep everything on track. It's not completely a theory since it's hinted at in episodes by the creators though, but definitely interesting. Eugene Harold Krabs is this old penny-pinching man who owns the Krusty Krab and employs SpongeBob and Squidward. Most of the time we see him in the show, he's doing something greedy to get more money or defending the Krabby Patty secret formula from Plankton. Dude is so old that he was born in 1942, and there's also a picture of naked Mr. Krabs without his shell, and honestly that's all you really need to know. Sheldon J. Plankton is the arch nemesis of Mr. Krabs and owns a failing restaurant, The Chum Bucket, across the street from the Krusty Krab. He's almost always spending his time trying to steal the secret Krabby Patty formula from Mr. Krabs, which is the main conflict in a bunch of SpongeBob episodes. Apparently Plankton was born on the same day that Mr. Krabs was, November 30th, 1942, and they even used to be close friends since they were both social outcasts and tried to open a burger restaurant, but after an argument, Plankton stormed out to make his own recipe, but definitely wasn't as successful. Now with the main cast out of the way, we're moving to the second layer of the iceberg, with the first being Karen, Plankton's robot wife. She's this supercomputer that helps Plankton in his schemes to steal the Krabby Patty secret formula. It's kind of funny that she got her name from the show creator's wife, Karen Hillenburg, because the computer wife is usually seen as a stereotypical, annoying, nagging wife, so I feel you, Steven, the old ball and chain, am I right? Mermaid Man used to be a superhero from a show in the SpongeBob universe called The Adventures of Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, but he's now senile and old, living in a retirement home, almost as senile as my confused-ass dog, Zachy, but, he's hanging in there. However, there were also actual superheroes in Bikini Bottom with the villains like Man Ray and Dirty Bubble, who I'll get into later on the iceberg. One of his most recognizable powers comes from the M on his belt. In the episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4, Patrick steals the belt and finds out that it's a shrink ray, which is also where Wumbo comes from. Funniest shit ever. He's also one of the 3 recurring characters in the show to have been fully retired when his voice actor died in 2012. Okay, hold on. While making this video, I realized there's a lot more SpongeBob characters out there, so if y'all get this video to 100 likes, I'll make one as soon as I can, because there's a lot of interesting stuff to go over. Barnacle Boy is the sidekick to Mermaid Man, but later in life when they're all old, he's the only one that actually knows where he is, unlike his partner Mermaid Man who probably has dementia. Despite this, he's still treated like a sidekick by Mermaid Man, who even orders Barnacle Boy a pipsqueak patty. He's like a Werben to Mermaid Man, being pretty much just the same thing. In my opinion, he's kind of just an off-brand Squidward with the way that he's written, and he's also kind of like tall and lanky, but that's whatever. Mrs. Puff is, you know, a pufferfish and the teacher at SpongeBob's local boating school. The thing is with her that she's trying to constantly teach SpongeBob how to drive, but he's also constantly failing the driving test. Mrs. Puff's history is a very mysterious and unknown one for a popular character in the show. She has also been secretly dating Mr. Krabs for at least 16 years, and we see the two first meet in the episode Krusty Love. There's some evidence out there that points to her using a new identity in Bikini Bottom after having a terrible boating accident happen in her past life. Patchy the pirate scared the living shit out of me when I was little for some reason, but he's actually just a part of the live action cast of characters in the show, and he's the self-appointed president of the SpongeBob Squarepants fan club, which of course he founded himself. And his house is filled with SpongeBob decor. The real reason he was added to the show in the second season was so the show's creators could increase the runtime of episodes, with live action being a lot cheaper to produce. Potty is a talking parrot alongside the other co-host Patchy when they're in the live action segments in the show. The name Potty is a play on Polly, as in like Polly want a cracker. Potty also has the role of the antagonist in some of the live action scenes, being more of a pest than a friend to Patchy. King Neptune is pretty much the god of Bikini Bottom and presumably the rest of the ocean, as characters can be seen saying things like "Thank Neptune" and "Oh my Neptune." He first appears in the episode Neptune's Spatula, where SpongeBob is able to wield the golden spatula, which gets the attention of King Neptune, who comes to the Krusty Krab to have a burger cooking competition and somehow even gets beat by SpongeBob. Neptune has a different appearance in the first movie, in which he's kind of just like a dad bod looking dude, more so than the Greek god that we see first in the show. He also has another design in the live action scenes where honestly he puts Jason Momoa to shame. The Flying Dutchman first appears in the episode Scaredy Pants, the first Halloween episode where SpongeBob dresses up as a Flying Dutchman at a party, which causes the real Flying Dutchman to show up, who is offended by all the horrible costumes portraying him because he's much scarier than those costumes, you know? As he's about to steal everyone's souls, SpongeBob takes his costume off and exposes his whole ass brain, which makes the Dutchman run away in terror, which I would do the same because that scene just scared the life out of me when I was little. One episode featuring him that really sticks out to me is Ghost Host, where he shapeshifts into a bunch of horrifying forms to scare SpongeBob and Patrick. He's got a lot of powers that honestly rival King Neptune in strength. The most powerful is when he is shown to pull out one of his eyes and turn it into an atomic bomb. Pearl is a teenage girl whale who lives with her dad, Mr. Krabs. The first thing that comes to mind with this relationship is how in the world are these two directly related, but Steven Hillenburg said he just wanted to have all the characters in the show be different animals. However, an official SpongeBob trivia book says that Pearl takes after her mother, who is seen in the show, so at one point, Mr. Krabs got freaky with a whale, so good for him. Pearl herself is like the basic pop culture obsessed teenage girl. We later learn that as a baby, she was almost always babysat by Squidward, who used to be like her uncle, pretty much. Mr. Krabs hopes that she will someday become the new owner of the Krusty Krab in his place, but I just can't see it. Larry pretty much is just this really big lobster gym bro. He mostly shows up working out in Goo Lagoon and first appears in the episode Ripped Pants, where he asks SpongeBob if he wants to lift some weights with him. An interesting relationship here is that he hangs out with Sandy at the beach instead of SpongeBob, who gets jealous because he can't even bench press the bar. When he isn't weightlifting at the beach, he's probably there as a lifeguard, like in the episode SpongeGuard on Duty, where SpongeBob again idolizes him. Also, here's a pic of the musical's interpretation of Larry with dreadlocks deadlifting 2 tires, which that's cool as hell. SpongeBob's parents are Harold and Margaret Squarepants. They both have their debut in the episode Home Sweet Pineapple, in which they show up to pick SpongeBob up after his house was eaten up by nematodes. As this happens, SpongeBob says goodbye Bikini Bottom, implying that his parents live out of town as well. They're both distinctly round compared to SpongeBob, and they seem to come from old money with the way that they're both portrayed as some like Great Gatsby type of shit. A lot of characters on this list are relatives of SpongeBob since the part of the show is almost fully drawn out, so prepare yourself for that. Squilliam Fancy Son is the wealthier and overall more successful counterpart to Squidward in the show. He met Squidward in high school band class, and since then they've just been complete rivals. Their character models are very similar, but Squilliam distinctly has a unibrow and wears a red robe. He first appears in the episode Band Geeks, where he shows up Squidward again with his success. In House Fancy, we get to see just how rich he is with a whole house tour and most notably a giant unibrow made of gilded doorknobs. However, his last appearance was in season 7 and he hasn't shown up since, so I don't think he's gonna come back. The French narrator is the one who introduces a lot of episodes and reads out all of the time cards. This plays back to what I referenced in Sandy's entry about the show nodding to a breaking of the fourth wall, where the whole thing is actually just a nature documentary. While mainly just being the narrator, he does make a live action appearance sometimes, like in the episode No Free Rides, where he's run over by Spongebob while trying to film for the show. When we can see his whole body, he appears in a classic 18th century diving suit. The character's design was based on one of Steven Hillenburg's biggest inspirations, Jacques Yves Cousteau, a sea life expert and documentary filmmaker, and his son John Michael Cousteau even makes an appearance in the SpongeBob SquarePants movie DVD commentary, talking about all the real-life species that inspired SpongeBob. The narrator was used to just narrate and introduce most of the episodes in season 1 and 2, but it was used a lot less after this, so that's kind of a good way to tell if you're watching an early episode or not. Grandma Squarepants, as I'm sure you assumed, is Squarepants' grandma, who is designed like a basic grandma who enjoys baking, knitting, and giving kisses. She first appears in the episode Grandma's Kisses, where SpongeBob visits her and does like a bunch of childish things like eating cookies, licking the spoon, listening to her stories, and being driven to work, and then he's left off at work with a big kiss on his forehead. He then gets teased by everyone at the Krusty Krab for this and shows up to her house the next day acting like a big mature adult. Because of this, she then gives all her grandmotherly love to Patrick, who might as well still be a child. Along with Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, she's one of 3 characters to be fully retired from the show, when her voice actor Marion Ross, weirdly similar to my Nana's name, stopped voice acting for good. Perch Perkins is a popular field reporter for the Bikini Bottom News in the SpongeBob universe. His debut is in the SpongeBob movie when Plankton is watching TV and sees Mr. Krabs being interviewed by the reporter. Since then, he's reappeared as a side character in expositional roles, like when he reports on the mad snail disease outbreak or the jellyfish migration. Something that we'll see a lot with these recurring characters is their inconsistency in design, especially with Perch, who is usually seen as a purple fish, but also appears as an orange fish sometimes, which just makes me think of Klaus from American Dad. Pretty fitting follow-up to the last entry, the realistic fish head is an announcer and anchorman in Bikini Bottom. He's usually alongside Perch Perkins as he's at the news desk commenting on what the reporter sees in the field, so also an expositional character. What I'm sure most people will recognize him for though is his role in singing a theme song before every episode. He's also the announcer in other events in the Bikini Bottom, like at the 21st Fry Cook Games, and even the narrator for the King of Karate video and the episode Karate Island. I couldn't help but include this theory because when reading the comments on this fandom page, I noticed someone pointing out that he has the same voice as Plankton and that he might as well be a robot Plankton made to control the media. Dude is definitely just too far into the alt-right rabbit hole, but go off, I guess. Old Man Jenkins is this old ass dude who appears first in the episode The Sponge Who Could Fly, where we see him as an old conservative dude who constantly says things like, "I knew no good would come from city folk and their flying machines." This episode was the only time he had this design and was replaced by the more familiar looking afterwards. His first major role in an episode is in High Sea Diving, where he goes crazy and thinks that SpongeBob is King Neptune, but when coming back to reality, he explains his backstory of how he ended up on Trash Island. On his previous birthday, someone gave him a dozen balloons, which caused him to float up away and somehow land on Trash Island. Along with that, he's over 100 years old, so the name is kind of fitting. Patrick's parents are Herb and Margie Starr. They're first mentioned in Home Sweet Pineapple as Patrick says they kicked him out so he'd have to live on his own. They actually appear in the episode I'm with Stupid, where they both show up at the end of the episode on Starfish Day. They all 3 look really similar, with Margie having black bangs and a floral dress, and Herb most notably having a big gray mustache. I'll go ahead and introduce y'all to the Star family tree, which is introduced in the episode Rule of Dumb, which shows all of Patrick's family and will be very useful later in the video. Mr. Krabs' mom. Betsy Krabs is an old, sweet lady, a lot like SpongeBob's grandma, but she can be a lot meaner at times. In Sailor Mouth, her first appearance, she makes SpongeBob, Patrick, and Mr. Krabs fully repaint her house as punishment for swearing. She also gets Painty raided by the same 3 of them, and she gets really pissed off at this and sends Mr. Krabs right to his room. Mrs. Tentacles, or Squidward's mom, is another old lady character in the show. Her character design is just like Squidward's but a lot wrinklier, and she's also in a pink robe and slippers. She first appears in Fools in April after Squidward pulls a prank on SpongeBob and has a thought bubble of his mom yelling at him, "You stink." So definitely mommy issues there, which actually explains a lot about Squidward. She first physically appears in Krusty Towers, where Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob have to go visit her to get Squidward some cookies. The scene itself is kind of funny because it looks like they kidnapped Mrs. Tentacles and stuffed her in the trunk, but they were actually just loading up cookies. I also gotta call out this down badass dude on our wiki page asking for her number, for a friend, of course. Man Ray is Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy's most powerful enemy. He's just as old as them, but he seems to still be at peak performance in the show. He has the power to shoot lasers from his hands, fly sometimes, and fully remove his head to throw it like a boomerang. As for his origin story, a long time ago he attempted to take over Bikini Bottom with a ray gun, but was stopped by Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy, who poured tartar sauce all over him. He first appears in the episode Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3 when Spongebob and Patrick are snooping around the secret lair, and Patrick frees Man Ray out of his tartar sauce prison. Luckily he still had the tickle belt on him, but manipulates SpongeBob and Patrick to thinking that he's a good person, and they let him go. The Dirty Bubble is the other main villain to Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy in the show. He's just this big evil brown bubble with the ability to fly, of course, being a bubble, and trapping people inside of his body, but also being a bubble, his biggest weakness is pointy objects that will just pop him. He can also be cleaned with soap and become a normal, not evil bubble every now and then. He first appears in Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 2, where he swallows up the two heroes and the Krusty Krab, and SpongeBob shows up trying to get an autograph, but ends up popping the bubble with his pencil on accident. He also appears again alongside Man Ray when they team up to form the organization EVIL, Every Villain is Lemons, and they adopt Barnacle Boy onto their evil team. Bubble Bass. This guy is just a really overweight bass fish. He shows up first in the episode Pickles to be the main antagonist by just being kind of a dickhead customer to SpongeBob after he makes him a great sandwich. Honestly, kind of feel for SpongeBob because I previously worked at Applebee's and those customers are what's come closest to fully breaking me. Bubble Bass shows up several more times, like in FUN where he sits on Plankton, in Plankton's Good Eye where he falls out of a window and crushes Plankton again, and in Moving Bubble Bass where he's the main antagonist and tricks SpongeBob and Patrick into helping him move, still just being kind of a dick. He also plays the role of like a secondary antagonist in the game Legend of the Lost Spatula and Lights, Camera, Pants. I'm sure y'all remember the running gag of a guy who would yell "my leg" in the background of scenes. That's Fred. Also, I just gotta shout out the people on fandom.com who will catalog every single background character and incidental character's appearance to every episode, which is just another level of dedication I'll hopefully get to someday. He appears dozens of times in the background but doesn't have a full debut as a character till the episode My Leg, where he is at risk of needing a robotic leg after hurting his leg so many times, and we follow him around the journey of staying out of harm's way. SpongeBob does his best to keep Fred safe, but eventually he admits that he likes to go to the hospital because that's when he can see the girl he loves, Nurse Daisy Bazooka. SpongeBob breaks Fred's leg on purpose to get him to the hospital so he can profess his love for the nurse, and she gladly reciprocates it. Anchovies. This isn't actually a single character, it's like this big ass group of anchovy fish that crowd into places for the most part. They appear in the pilot episode of the show, Help Wanted, as the first sort of antagonist when they flood into the Krusty Krab, and SpongeBob has to make a bunch of Krabby Patties at once for them. They appear countless other times in the show's movies and video games, and are honestly just seen as background characters like Incidental 114, Incidental 115, Incidental 30, and Octavius Rex, which we'll get to later. They even got their own browser game released on Nick.com about them in 2000, where SpongeBob has to feed hordes of anchovies with this hydrodynamic spatula, which kind of just looks like an early version of the game Osu to me. Burger Beard is the primary antagonist in the SpongeBob movie Sponge Out of Water. This is the first theme song with Painty the Pirate. In the episode Sandy, SpongeBob and the Worm, Sandy gets her tail stolen by this mysterious worm terrorizing Bikini Bottom. She goes out looking for her tail with SpongeBob, and they go into this cave so Sandy can wrestle the worm for her tail, but in actuality the cave was the mouth of the Alaskan bullworm and she only wrestled its tongue. They're then chased by this big ass worm and lead it off a cliff where it crushes the newly moved Bikini Bottom. Patrick had them move the entirety of Bikini Bottom to get away from the worm, which actually just didn't end up helping. Other Alaskan bullworms appear in the series, like in the episode My Leg, where SpongeBob tries to get one to hurt Fred's leg, and in A Place for Pets where Sandy has one of them as a pet as she's going out of the Krusty Krab with one. Dennis is the secondary antagonist in the SpongeBob Squarepants movie. He's this really big, scary, muscular biker fish who's then hired by Plankton to stop SpongeBob and Patrick. He tracks them down by finding sesame seeds dropped by the paddy wagon and following their tracks. They finally meet at the outskirts of Shell City where Dennis explains what he was hired to do, and he rips off their fake mustaches that gave them manly confidence and also shows off that he can on command grow his own mustache. As he's about to step on SpongeBob and Patrick with his spiked boot, he gets stepped on by the Cyclops, who has an even bigger boot. He nearly survived this, however, and showed up later on the back of David Hasselhoff. SpongeBob offers Dennis Goober dollars and bubbles, which actually just get into his eyes and distract him. Then he collides into a sailboat as David Hasselhoff swims under it. Really interesting climax to the movie. The Cyclops. This is the third antagonist in the Spongebob movie who I mentioned stepping on Dennis in the last entry. He's not actually a Cyclops, just some guy wearing a vintage diving suit. He's first mentioned in the movie when Mindy, King Neptune's daughter, mentions him as a hazard on the way to Shell City. Later on, right after stepping on Dennis, he grabs Spongebob and Patrick to take them back to his gift shop. There, he places them under a heat lamp so they'll dry up and can be made into souvenirs. Right at the edge of death, Spongebob and Patrick both shed a single tear which rolls down the lamp's wire and shuts off the lamp and starts a fire which triggers the sprinklers to save them. However, the Cyclops comes back from the bathroom to see this and tries to stop them, but the sprinklers also somehow resurrect all the other dead fish who swarm him and squirt Elmer's glue all over his face. Also, I think the people editing these articles on fandom need to chill out because the first bullet point under trivia for the Cyclops says, his appearance is a reference to Polyphemus from Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey. But it's like SpongeBob, so like, chill. Mindy. She's King Neptune's daughter who is soon to be the Queen of the Sea. We meet her in the Spongebob movie where she explains to her friends Spongebob and Patrick that King Neptune had his crown stolen and they need to go travel to Shell City to get it back. She also helps by giving them kelp mustaches, which convinces them to keep on going with their journey. We see in the movie that she's a lot nicer in comparison to her dad and actually cares about their father's subjects. She's also somehow even memorized the name of every fish in the sea ocean. She didn't appear in the show again until the episode SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout because Nickelodeon and Paramount were in a legal dispute and Paramount wouldn't let them use designs and assets made for the movie. Smitty, Werben, and Jensen. In the episode One Krabs Trash, a classic, Mr. Krabs makes up a fake name and story behind a soda drinking hat so he could get it back. Smitty, Werben, and Jensen. He was number 1. SpongeBob decides to go bury the hat in the made-up grave, but it turns out he was actually a real person, and SpongeBob leaves it in the grave that also says he was number 1. Mr. Krab then goes to retrieve the hat so he can sell it and digs up the body, but skeletons in the graveyard come to life to stop Mr. Krabs from stealing the hat. He had to fight his way out of there and just defiled all these dead fish bodies, but he makes it back with the hat, but it's now worthless. Other than that, he only ever appears in the series when his tombstone can be seen in The Gateway, and his hat shows up in SpongeBob's place and Lost and Found. Nat Peterson. He's a background fish in the show, but more so just a fish model that the creators use interchangeably. To stress the fact of how many episodes he's in, I'll have a list of them going during this segment. His first appearance was in Ripped Pants, as SpongeBob told him about the whole Ripped Pants situation. Since this model is used for whatever roles the creators need a fish to fill, his list of occupations is really long and includes some like bus driver, SWAT team member, preacher, pilot, bank security guard, and sailor, just to name a few. He even appears in the SpongeBob movie and SpongeBob stream as a customer named Phil ordering a Krabby Patty, and for what I thought of this guy when I saw him, I think of the time that Karen paid him to be a customer at the Chum Bucket. We only know his name from separate episodes where people offhandedly mention his name being Nat and then later also Peterson. Harold is a lot like Nat from the last entry, with them both being recurring characters in the background who don't really have a lot of continuity or identity for the most part. He's the blue fish that was the torchlighter at the Fry Cook games, working at Glove World, and working at the pet shop in Gary in Love, if any of those ring a bell to you. He also appeared first in Ripped Pants, and his official description reads, cyan skinned, wears a white shirt, red shorts, Vans sneakers, and shark-like fin. But he's also been seen nude in the episode Your Shoes Untied, so that's pretty cool, right? The only running gags or personality traits with Harold is that he doesn't seem to like old people, and he's usually polite, but can also get kind of pissed off every now and then. Lord Royal Highness is the Emperor of the Lost City of Atlantis. He first appeared as the antagonist in Atlantis Squarepants. This was a 40-minute special episode where SpongeBob and the rest of the main cast journey to Atlantis. When they all arrive there, the first person they meet is Lord Royal Highness, who shows them around the city filled with knowledge, riches, and art, with most of the main cast splitting off into places that excite them. The conflict here arises when SpongeBob and Patrick are left alone with the world's oldest bubble, and they accidentally pop it. After confessing what they did to the Emperor, he says it was actually a mock bubble and then shows them the real oldest bubble, and they also pop that. They then have to fight off the Atlantean guards as well as Plankton, who snuck his way onto the bus and then got control of the tanks in there. Also, somehow in the episode they got David Bowie to be his voice actor, which is kinda nuts. He also appears in the 2007 SpongeBob Atlantis Squarepants game, which pretty much just follows the story of the original episode, but you know, as a game. I remember playing it on the Wii, and this shit is actually just peak gaming. Okay, one last thing, he also appeared in Monopoly SpongeBob Squarepants Edition as an unlockable character with all the bonus cards and a secret code. Goofy Goober. I'm pretty sure this is just talking about the mascot guy for Goofy Goober's ice cream parlor. He shows up in the original SpongeBob movie singing his Goofy Goober theme song on stage with a bunch of kids, but at the end of the scene, SpongeBob and Patrick are drunk off of ice cream singing on the stage with him. He appears every now and then in the mascot costume, but in the Goofy Newbie, we see him take off his disguise, revealing him as a bodyguard fish who appears even more often in the show, who kicks Patrick out of the ice cream parlor. Again, due to the issue with Paramount and Goofy Goobers being technically their property, because it was introduced in the movie, but he didn't appear in the series from 2005 to 2014. Kevin the Sea Cucumber. He's, a sea cucumber, but he's first seen as the leader of the Jelly Spotters in I'm Your Biggest Fanatic. SpongeBob is completely infatuated with this guy, but he turns out he's kind of rude and a dick most of the time, just like Bubble Bass, and even hates all his fans. He invites SpongeBob to go jellyfishing with him just to take advantage of him and bully him some more. His plans go poorly though, and Kevin ends up getting stung way more, so he gives SpongeBob with a very dangerous task of catching a queen jellyfish. In actuality though, the queen jellyfish was actually a remote-controlled drone used by the Jelly Spotters to taunt SpongeBob. But all of a sudden an actual king jellyfish appears and falls in love with the fake queen jellyfish, and then it attacks Kevin and his friends. In conclusion, the Jelly Spotters revolt against Kevin and rip off his crown to give it to SpongeBob, which makes him the new group's leader. His only other major appearance in the show is in Patrick the Mailman, where Patrick shows up to his house trying to deliver a jury duty summons, but he's still just a dick to them. The Tattletale Strangler is this fish criminal who goes around Bikini Bottom just strangling people. In the episode SpongeBob Meets the Strangler, we first see him littering at the Krusty Krab, already just too far dude, and SpongeBob calls the police on him for this. After evading the cops, he gets a disguise which is just a novelty mustache, and then he seeks out SpongeBob to get some payback. Even with SpongeBob being completely clueless to the Strangler's intentions, he keeps getting interrupted by things like birthday parties and Patrick coming into the house. He even gaslights Patrick into thinking he's the Tattletale Strangler and making him turn himself into the police. SpongeBob eventually makes the Strangler so furious that he rips off the mustache and reveals his identity to him. The Strangler gets so annoyed and terrified of SpongeBob and his luck of not getting strangled that he goes insane and begs to be locked away at the police department. I'm pretty sure he only ever appears again in the online game Bikini Bottom Brawlers. I'm sure all the SpongeBob aficionados like me that are still watching this way too long video are thinking of Flats the Flounder's debut in the episode The Bully, but he actually shows up first in Sandy's rocket as one of the fish that SpongeBob and Patrick capture while they're alien hunting. Also, if you're this far into the video, please, dear God, go ahead and subscribe. I needed to feel good about myself. But yeah, his biggest role is in The Bully, which is set in Miss Puff's boating school where Flats is newly attending and dead set on kicking SpongeBob's ass. Actually, hold on, in the episode it was unclear why, but maybe he remembers the time SpongeBob captured him. Maybe that's it. Who knows? SpongeBob even tries to tell Flats' parents, but he just threatens to beat them up too, so there's not much he can really do about that. Flats goes on to actually beat the shit out of SpongeBob and continually punch him, but it turns out SpongeBob, being a sponge, doesn't feel any pain from this. A whole week of punching SpongeBob to no avail passes, and at the end of the episode, Flats passes out in the class, and then SpongeBob's raising his fist at him. Miss Puff thinks it was him. Octavius Rex is an anchovy who first appears in the episode The Chaperone at prom, being described as long, tan, and handsome by Pearl. He later on asked to dance with her, but Pearl is already dancing with SpongeBob, so he pretty much gets cucked by a sponge. His next appearance is in Mutiny on the Krusty, as one of the customers judging Mr. Krabs after the whole Krusty Krab is blown away in a rip current. He really never has any big roles in episodes, but is sort of just like a male Karen in the background every now and then. Incidentals. This isn't really just one character, but a broader grouping for all the background characters in the show. They're categorized like this since they're never given names, but could still be documented in their appearances on every episode by the maniacs on SpongeBob's wiki. There are literally hundreds of these incidental characters, which are at just most given one line of dialogue, but that's about it for them. Finally, Squarepants is one of SpongeBob's cousins who appears in the episode with the same name. His main character trait is being really accident prone. In the episode he comes to stay with SpongeBob, immediately fucking up the fridge and causing the toilet to flood. He takes Stanley to work with him, and Mr. Krabs hires his cousin thinking he'll be, just as hardworking as SpongeBob. But of course Stanley just causes more accidental trouble at the Krusty Krab, and Mr. Krabs finally realizes Stanley isn't as great of a worker, but comes up with the idea for him to go work at the Chum Bucket to cause trouble over there instead, and he also just ends up exploding the restaurant. He was pretty much just a throwaway character that hardly ever appears again, but the most interesting thing is that his episode was number 100 in the series. Jim is the original fry cook for the Krusty Krab and shows up in the episode The Original Fry Cook. It turns out he became a successful world-renowned chef after leaving the Krusty Krab. He shows up to the restaurant for nostalgia, but Mr. Krabs and Squidward are just infatuated with him, but Spongebob gets jealous because he wasn't there when Jim was working. Apparently his burgers are so good that after trying one, Spongebob goes into a whole ass like acid trip, and then after begging, Spongebob convinces Jim to teach him. They do a whole fry cook training montage, and by the end of it he can't manage to catch up with Jim's skill, which causes Spongebob to just completely resign from the job. Jim talks him out of it with his backstory from working there. In it, Squidward and Jim are talking about pretty much just making it out the hood and starting their own restaurant with it all themed like the late 60s. He asks Mr. Krabs for a raise, who just laughs at him and then makes him leave. I think after this whole pep talk, Spongebob realizes the lesson here is that he may not be as good as Jim, but he's a cheap worker, so everything's okay. He only ever appeared in this one episode, but he's one of few fry cooks that could actually beat SpongeBob in skill. Blackjack Squarepants is SpongeBob's older cousin who always bullied him. In the episode of the same name, SpongeBob gets a letter from him saying he just got out of jail and that he's going to see his parents. And you know, fearing the worst, SpongeBob goes on this big rabbit chase of meeting a bunch of his family members trying to find Blackjack. After ending up at his freedom party for getting out of prison hosted by SpongeBob's parents, Blackjack finally shows up and it turns out he's now like the size of SpongeBob's foot, which isn't explained in the episode, but fair enough. Other than that, Blackjack hasn't really changed much and he even tries to beat SpongeBob's toe up, but there's not really much he can do now. Also, this is like the only time he shows up in the series, so he's like one of those throwaway SpongeBob family characters. The hash-slinging slasher. In the episode Graveyard Shift, SpongeBob is working a late-night shift at the Krusty Krab with Squidward, who tells him a ghost story about the hash-slinging slasher. In the story, he was a previous fry cook at the restaurant who was so clumsy that he accidentally sliced off one of his hands and replaced it with a rusty spatula. On his way home from work that day, he was even hit by a bus and then died, but then fired at his funeral. Ever since that day, his ghost has been haunting the Krusty Krab every Tuesday when the bus that killed him drops him off there. His presence is preceded by flickering lights, a phone call but nobody answers, and his bus stopping out front. Squidward eventually tells SpongeBob the story was made up because he got so scared, but later in the night, the signs for the hash-slinging slasher's arrival start happening, and he comes out of the bus that dropped him off, but it turns out he was just a previous fry cook, like a really normal dude that wasn't trying to haunt them, just looking for a job. And it was Nosferatu flickering the lights and all that, but this dude is actually scarier than the story Squidward could come up with, because I don't know what Nosferatu is supposed to be, but that shit's frightening. Since this is his primary appearance in the series, the only other interesting thing I could find out was that in the Indonesian airing of the episode, his backstory was changed a little bit to have the hash-slinging slasher go crazy and die in a fire instead of losing his hand. Reg is this big tough guy fish with a mom heart tattoo on his chest. He appears a few times in the show, but his most notable role is in his debut in No Weenies Allowed, where he's seen as the bouncer to the Salty Spittoon. SpongeBob tries to get in, but according to Reg, he's too weak. Sandy, however, easily gets allowed in by ripping off his tattoo and flipping it upside down to say wow, which is just crazy. But SpongeBob is sent over to Weenie Hut Jr. Eventually, he fakes a fight with Patrick and Reg lets him in. He appears like 5 other times in the series, usually just in the background being a tough guy, and even in the Sponge on the Run movie at the Lighthouse Casino gambling. David Hasselhoff is a popular actor most known for starring in Baywatch. If you were wondering how he ties into the SpongeBob universe, in the climax of the SpongeBob SquarePants movie, he rescues SpongeBob and Patrick, who ride on his back and have a whole ass fight scene on the way back to Bikini Bottom. I thought this was the only cameo, but in the 40-minute special episode SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, he appears kayaking when the French narrator's submarine knocks him into the sea, and then again later in the episode at the beach where he spotted a submarine the second time and wishing SpongeBob a happy birthday. Jack Kahuna Laguna is a tan, sexy surfing legend who's met in the episode SpongeBob SquarePants vs. the Big One, and he lives on this island in solitude. In the episode, SpongeBob and the other main characters are selling Krabby Patties at sea when a giant wave hits them and they're taken out to the island that Jack Kahuna Laguna lives on. A bunch of surfer hippie dudes live on the island permanently who introduce them to the surfing legend after SpongeBob and Patrick failed to learn how to surf. When they find him, he comes out with an unbelievably long surfboard and he's pretty much like Jesus but a surfer. Throughout his training, he doesn't really teach much and just shows off while saying just keep breathing and gives them time-wasting tasks. In the middle of a storm, JKL runs up top a big Aztec monument and explains that every 1,000 years the planets align to cause a giant wave called the Big One. He tells them this is their only way to get back to Bikini Bottom in one wave, but in return they have to give it a sacrifice. On the wave, JKL returns to save their lives and he sacrifices himself so that the wave can make it home safe. However, somehow he even beats the wave and then makes it back to Bikini Bottom with the rest of them. Still though, this is the only time we see him in the series other than in the SpongeBob vs. the Big One beach cook-off, but just really still a legend. In SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, the main cast go around on a bus guided tour of the land world. The bus stops in this place called the Trusty Slab, where we see Jim Bob cooking up some slabby patties. The Jim Bob character is like an off-brand live-action version of SpongeBob but the Krusty Krab, but he's played by SpongeBob's voice actor Tom Kenny, so you know, the voice is like the same. This was a one-off cameo for him in the show, except for an episode of Camp Coral where SpongeBob is going through a book of his different personalities, and honestly, I don't know, I haven't watched the show, but I'm sure it's interesting. Mr. Manward is another character seen in the Trusty Slab in SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout. This guy is pretty much just the human version of Squidward, who's played by Roger Bumpus, Squidward's voice actor, and is also the Manward's only appearance in the show. Okay, last guy from the Trusty Slab, this is Mr. Slabs, the live-action version of Mr. Krabs, and he's portrayed by Clancy Brown, Mr. Krabs' voice actor. Kinda cool to just see how everything would look in live action. Frank the Whale is, you know, a whale, but the thing I noticed the most is the squiggly tracing of his mouth. His most prominent appearance is in his debut episode Ripped Pants. After SpongeBob asks himself if he was the biggest loser on the beach, Frank, Incidental 22, and the loser come out together to console him while singing the song Ripped Pants, and Frank is the one who played the drums. He appears again in a different model in Slimy Dancing as one of the contestants in Bikini Bottom Dance-a-thon, where he balances a beach ball on his head while balancing all on his right flipper, so kinda cool, you know? We only know his name is Frank from the episode You Don't Know Sponge after Patrick makes whale noises, and it cuts away to Frank thinking his ex-wife Martha is calling for him, but a friend has to assure him that it's not. The rock bottomites are a bunch of deep sea fish that SpongeBob visits in the episode Rock Bottom. They're all loosely designed after actual deep sea creatures, but also have a different language that consists of English but also just blowing raspberries between sentences, which pretty much just confuses SpongeBob, who can't really get out of the deep sea. I only really remember this episode because the designs were really scary, but I mean, other than that, the rock bottomites don't appear anywhere else in the series. Tentacle Acres residents. In the episode Squidville, Squidward is just fed up with Patrick and SpongeBob because they sucked up his house with a reef blower, which, fair enough, I mean, it happens. Not sure if that's under his homeowner's insurance, but somehow he got a new house in Tentacle Acres, this squid suburbia for people just like him who all do the same things and live in the same looking houses. No matter how perfect it is to fulfill Squidward's desires, he eventually gets fed up and bored with the perfect life. The community even has a whole security system that ensures no other species comes inside. Pretty much all the residents seem to be disgusted by anything that isn't like them, and man, I'm really finally realizing how this whole episode is just a take on suburbia, but more gentrified and a little bit, you know, Hitlery. Sherm Squarepants is SpongeBob's uncle who sent Stanley to go stay with him. He's mentioned several times in the show, but we only really get to see him once. In the episode Pest of the West, SpongeBob shows off a picture of his uncle fitting an entire watermelon up his nose, which he's just apparently really known for. Truly a work of art, honestly. He's also likely named after Sherm Cohen, a writer for the show who's been around since the start of SpongeBob. Blue Squarepants is another one of SpongeBob's uncles. He's a retired police captain in the town and pretty much just drinks clam tomato chowder juice and listens to country music all day and doesn't really have any wife or kids. He only ever appears in the episode Blackjack when SpongeBob goes to him for help tracking Blackjack down. Because he was playing the music so loud, he thought SpongeBob was offering to do chores, which he does several times until he actually listens to SpongeBob and tells him that Blackjack just lives right next door to him. But he's also scared of Blackjack, so he doesn't really go and help. Also, I know I've done this a few times, but there's this one guy on their wiki saying that everything reminds me of Prince Philip, and I guess I see it. I don't know. Mr. Krabs' nephews are these three little crab triplets who only ever show up once. In Stanley S. Squarepants, they can be seen in a flashback of Mr. Krabs telling the triplets that they couldn't have a job at the Krusty Krab, and we also find out that they like to go solving mysteries as a group, a little Scooby-Doo action, you know? The other time is in the episode Lame and Fortune, where they appear in a dream as guests at Mr. Krabs' imaginary funeral in his own head. They're also kind of like a parody of Donald Duck's nephews from, you know, DuckTales. Given by the name, this is Squidward's old, icky, wrinkly grandma, who's, from what I can see, just a dick and kind of abusive to Squidward, but I mean, it is Squidward. Her debut is in the episode Chum Fricassee, when she's mentioned as Squidward tries to make her secret fricassee recipe into a chum fricassee after leaving to work at the chum bucket. Because people loved it so much, they tried to make more and ended up undercooking the chum. After this, Grandma Tentacle shows up to berate and abuse him for messing up a recipe because it made everyone in the chum bucket sick. She also appears a good bit in the Patrick Star Show as a recurring character, just being like a basic old mean grandma. The Weenie Hut Jr.'s robot is this hot dog shaped animatronic bartender at Weenie Hut Jr.'s in the episode No Weenies Allowed. SpongeBob comes into the restaurant defeated after being denied entry to the salty spittoon, and the robot makes them drinks. Along with that, he also gives SpongeBob the idea to fake a fight with Patrick so he can get into the salty spittoon. This is the only time he shows up in the series, which is sad because I mean just so much potential with the hot dog animatronic guy. Ma Angler is this morbidly overweight hillbilly in the episode Trenchbillies, who is themed off of an anglerfish, like that shit from Nemo, you know? In the episode she appears, SpongeBob and Patrick fall into this hollow earth type area of the ocean, and the hillbillies take them to Ma Angler, the leader of their community. For landing on and crushing their outhouse, Ma sentences them to a gang initiation, and if they fail, they die. It consists of a banjo competition, a hootin' and hollerin' contest, and a fight in the ring, but in the last trial they actually just show off their jellyfishing skills, which really impresses Ma Angler, who dubs them Sponge Joe Bob and Daryl, honorary Trenchbillies. But the conflict here is that the local folk don't let them leave, as they now have the honor of taking care of Ma till they die. According to this one hillbilly, Ma needs her purse-carried cat massages and read her Shakespeare before bed every night. And she really likes iambic pentameter. Very important. At the end of the episode, they all chase SpongeBob back to the Krusty Krab, who makes peace with Ma Angler and the Trenchbillies by serving them Krabby Patties. Madame Hagfish is, you know, a hagfish, but she's like really fucking ugly and slimy and wrinkly. In the episode The Curse of the Hex, she comes into the Krusty Krab looking for food, but she doesn't have any money, so Mr. Krab gets angry at her, telling her to leave, but she also hexes them so that no customers will come into the restaurant. Also, let me intervene real quick here. I just got reminded of the Hex Girls, and can we just take a moment to appreciate how bad the Hex Girls are? Literally just morphed me into the person that I am today. Literally dream women. Oh yeah, so when SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs go to the witch's magic wheel wagon house, asking for the curse to be broken, she sends them on a quest to get golden doubloons for her. In the end of the episode, she just uses the golden doubloons for her washing machine and then lifts the curse, which was actually just a clothes sign that she put out front of the Krusty Krab, and they somehow didn't notice. So she doesn't actually have like witch powers, I don't think. The only other time she's used as a character in the series is in the Patrick Star Show, where she appeared on the Patrick's Halloween TV special. Shelly is that scallop that always appears in the background of SpongeBob's bedroom in a little bird cage. While she does technically appear in a lot of episodes, with SpongeBob's room being a pretty commonly used setting, she hasn't even been addressed or talked about in any episode. The only reason we know her name is from a bonus feature in the DVD for the show's first season called The Bikini Bottoms Up Tour, where Patchy talks about her saying pretty much just her name. The only time the bird really does anything is when it flies away from SpongeBob's house because it gets set on fire or something like that, because I mean you can't kill Shelly. Mr. Charleston. Okay, so calling back to that live action bit in SpongeBob's Big Birthday Blowout, this is Plankton, but in person, and he's the owner of the Crumb Bucket. He's fittingly portrayed by Doug Lawrence, Plankton's voice actor, and pretty much all he does in the scene is try to steal the secret sauce recipe from the trusty Slab. Alright, one more person from the live action scene. This is Carol, the human version of Sandy Cheeks, and she's played by, you know, her voice actor, who also walks around and orders a Slabby Patty, all in an astronaut costume. In the scene, she orders a Slabby Patty, but realizes there's no meat, then gets mad at the cook and helps stop Mr. Charleston's robbery by karate chopping him. Davy Jones. You've probably only ever heard his name be used in phrases like Davy Jones' locker by characters in the show, but there's a little bit more to this guy. In real life, Davy Jones was actually the lead singer for the rock band The Monkees, who died in 2012. However, before sadly passing, he makes a cameo in the special episode SpongeBob SquarePants vs. the Big One, in a cutaway of him singing a few words of Daydream Believer, one of the band's songs. Other than that, he can be seen as a skeleton in The Curse of Bikini Bottom and Krusty Cleaners. Squeeze Tentacles is Squidward's cousin, and he's actually one of the few characters whose squid design is a little bit different than the basic Squidward model. He's got a longer slouched neck and has a more, let's say, erect nose that is covered also in pimples. He makes a quick appearance in the episode Stanley S. Squarepants, where there's a flashback of him being turned down from getting a job at the Krusty Krab and simply walks away unbothered, saying whatever. Donna is one of the fish prisoners in Doing Time. The episode is about Mrs. Puff being afraid she's getting arrested, and Donna appears in a dream as one of her friends at lunchtime and later a student in her boating school, but just as bad as SpongeBob, which terrorizes her, and then she drives off a cliff. She's probably just a man wearing a wig that Mrs. Puff manifested in her head, but I think she's a lovely woman, okay? Patrick Notstar. Hopefully this is what y'all noticed in the thumbnail and I've been waiting for this dude because he's freaky as hell. In the episode Hide and Then What Happens, where Patrick is hiding from Spongebob and hide and seek but forgets they're playing and goes home, which makes Spongebob have to look all over Bikini Bottom for him. He looks for Patrick in this bar called The End of the World, and the bartender says there's a pink starfish sitting at the bar, but when the character turns around it's just a similar looking sea star but with a lot of facial hair. Realizing his situation, all that Patrick Notstar tells Spongebob is that games are about fun and not winning all the time. The 3-point foul. Okay, this one probably should have been on the bottom of the iceberg, but it's literally just a dude in a bird costume who appears as one of the planned guests for Patchy the Pirate's SpongeBob TV special in the episode Truth or Square. He's announced as a baseball mascot and is seen backstage later in the segment. The episode was really odd because it had a bunch of live action scenes with special guests and famous actors, but also had a lot of deleted scenes from Patchy's segment, which I believe is where this character comes from, so sorry if I only have like a picture or two of him. The Guy on the Penny. This is another guest star for Patchy's TV special, and if y'all know your presidents, the guy on the penny is just Abraham Lincoln, who shows up in the episode, somehow. I don't know how they brought dude back to life, but very impressive. His only lines are in the green room asking Patchy if he's okay, and later showing off his SpongeBob plushie, which I'm starting to think this whole episode was just a way to sell more SpongeBob merchandise, but fair enough, you know? The Queen. Okay, one more from Truth or Square special. These are all just really deep cut, but this one is the actual Queen who shows up as a guest on the program. Her only line is asking how to eat a pineapple since they weren't sliced up in the green room. That's really it. There's not much else. Okay, this is the last one from Truth or Square, I promise. It's Pink, a famous American singer-songwriter in the 90s and early 2000s who shows up in the episode too. Towards the end of the episode, she sings the song We've Got Scurvy, and I think my mom used to be a big Pink fan, so I can vouch that she must be a great singer because the song in the episode is pretty good as well. Throughout the show, Squidward's house is seen to be pretty much alive every now and then, like in the secret box where the whole ass building bends over just to see what's in Patrick's secret box. However, the most obvious time when the house is alive is in the episode Good Neighbors, where Squidward installs a security system, but the house grows robot limbs and then runs away to destroy a majority of Bikini Bottom, which is crazy. King Amoeba. In the episode Rule of Dumb, we are presented with a whole ass family tree that shows Patrick and Gary are technically related. I don't know how the biodiversity in this family line adds up, but at the top we can see King Amoeba, who's married to Queen Mildew. King Amoeba is just like an amoeba, but with a crown and gray mustache. Queen Mildew. Okay, the next like 6 entries are just different people on the family tree who were actually never even seen in the show, just a short image given in the family tree, so I'll read out their names and give y'all a second to take in this amazing character design. The family tree consists of Yorick, Princess Tulsa, Prince Callus, Prince Dingus, Ma Tucket, Billy Bob, Carl, and Sluggo. Todd Squarepants. Okay, here at the bottom of the iceberg, so getting really obscure, this character only ever appears in the official book The Never-Ending Stay. Todd comes to stay with SpongeBob in the book, and he's mostly just this hipster looking dude who's really messy, and his socks smell so bad that Squidward complains about it all the way from over next door. Other than that, he's referenced once in the episode Patrick's Staycation, where SpongeBob calls himself Todd when he welcomes Patrick into the Star Rock Inn. Robin Williams. Getting back to the TV special from Truth or Square, somehow Patchy gets Robin Williams, RIP to the GOAT, to be a guest star on the show. In the episode, we see him being escorted by Patchy on the way to the green room. When he goes into the bathroom, he tries to call his manager and ask for help because he's seemingly kidnapped to be there in the show. He's also the first celebrity to show up to the green room, but sneaks out to safety afterwards. Triumph the Insult Comic Dog is this puppeteered Rottweiler that puffs on cigars while insulting people. He was created for a segment on Late Night with Conan O'Brien as a parody of the Westminster Dog Show in 1997. In the bid, he just appeared at the dog show telling bad jokes in his Eastern European accent. He even appeared in the actual Westminster Dog Show in 1999, interacting with other dogs and being eventually ejected for humping several other dogs, even though he's just a puppet, but you know, fair enough, gotta get the bone somehow. And how does he tie into SpongeBob? You might have already guessed it, he was in the Truth or Square TV special. Patchy calls up Triumph asking him to appear on the show. In the scene, he pretty much just makes fun of Patchy messing up his name several times and ends up telling him the script would be great to poop on and then just hangs up. Mr. Krabs' sister. This character is never actually seen in the show or even mentioned, but is inferred to exist from other points made in the show. We know that Mr. Krabs has a sibling since his nephews show up in the episode Stanley S. Squarepants, and later on in the series, Grandpa Redbeard said Mr. Krabs was his only grandson. So he's gotta have a sister if he then has nephews as well. But yeah, this is all we even know about her sister. Like, even in the family tree, it just says unknown sister. If you actually made it through the entire video, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if you're here, you might as well subscribe. You know, I mean, it'd be nice. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, like I said. Also, this iceberg chart was posted anonymously, so I can't really thank who it is. But if you're out there, I love you so much. Really great formatting. But I hope y'all enjoyed and have a good rest of the day.